Welcome to Unabridged Bookstore's virtual event space. We're very excited that you guys have decided to join us tonight to celebrate the release of Life Sciences. Before we officially get started with our conversation here, just a few quick notes about your setup. We are very grateful that you've chosen to spend the evening with us. If you have any kind of trouble with your Zoom webinar, or if you have any questions about Unabridged Bookstore, this event, or any of the other stuff that we've got going on, you can just hit a quick reply to the email invite that you were sent, and I'll be on hand to answer your questions as best I can. Throughout the course of the conversation here, if you have a question for either of our guests tonight, you'll see at the bottom of your screen that there's a little Q&A button. If you tap on that, a window will pop up and you'll have a chance to submit your questions there. We're going to have a reading from the book and some conversation, and then if time allows, we'll get to some of your questions toward the end. But thank you again for joining us, and thank you for putting up with another Zoom meeting. We're very excited tonight to be hosting and celebrating the release of Life Sciences. This book was just released earlier this week. We're very excited tonight to have a couple people here to help us celebrate. Life Sciences is an inventive coming-of-age novel from the acclaimed French novelist Joy Sorman that boldly investigates the female condition, bodily autonomy, and the failings of modern medicine as one young woman confronts a centuries-old matrilineal curse. And tonight, to help us celebrate, we have the translator of the book, Lara Vergnaud, who is a literary translator from the French. She's the recipient of the 2019 French Voices Grand Prize and 2 Penheim translation grants. And was also a finalist for the 2019 Best Translated Book Award. She's joining us from Washington, D.C. tonight, and we're so grateful to have her here to talk about Life Sciences. And to help us host this conversation tonight, we have something of an unabridged favorite. Catherine Lacy, who contributed the introduction to the book, is also the author of the works Nobody Is Ever Missing the Answers, Certain American States, and most recently, the novel Pew. She's had work published in The New Yorker, Harper's, The Believer, and elsewhere. And we're big fans of hers here at the shop, so we're very grateful that she's joining us to host this conversation tonight. Thank you again for joining us, Catherine and Lara, and thank you everybody for being in attendance tonight. I'm going to turn it over to the two of them.
Thank you so much, Matt. Yeah, sorry, this is yet another Zoom for everybody, but I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to see Catherine, who I think I last saw right before the pandemic ended the world.
Yeah, yeah. So so I met Laura at the OMI International Art Center. Is that what they would be calling it? In 2019. But then it was not through my nefarious connections to you that I got to do the introduction for this book. It was totally separate. And so then it was like, you know, being brought on for this and then being like, it's Laura, this is so exciting, because I'd already started reading some of your translations since I met you, and it was like, oh great. Like so speaking of, I think we were going to hear we were thinking maybe Laura would read to us a little bit at the beginning.
Yeah. Before I start, quick note, I live a block away from a fire station, and my 6-month-old baby is sleeping in the room next door. So I apologize for the inevitable interruption that will happen. But that said, so yeah, I'm going to read a short excerpt. Matt did a really great intro for the book. Basically, it's a book about illness in the most general sense, but specifically about one family who, since the Middle Ages, every eldest female daughter has been struck by some bizarre disease or birth defect or condition. And so the family is persuaded it's a curse. And through the ages, that story has been handed down and changed and adapted. And so in Life Sciences, the protagonist is Ninon, who is living in Paris, modern day, 17 years old, wakes up one day, it's a January morning, she's listening to Rihanna, and her arms are on fire. Anything that touches her, she just experiences excruciating pain. So she's, she thinks, this is it, the curse has touched me, this is how it's going to be for me. And then the book is all about her quest to kind of find, first of all, a diagnosis, which can be really vital with unknown rare diseases, and then a cure. And then sort of it moves on, and she decides she doesn't want to be cursed. And does she have to be cursed? And, just because the story's been written, does that mean that it has to inevitably come true? So that's sort of the backdrop. I'm going to read a short excerpt, if I can find it, from one of my favorite chapters in the book. At the hospital, Ninon gleefully blends in with the other patients, melts into a mass of kindred souls, pathologies milling together. She strolls along the outside paths as if she's in a garden of disease, planting with proliferating, pollinating species. Immediately feels at home in this hushed environment, a biological stomping ground where glances meet, full of empathy and humility, and also submission. Ninon is alone in her room, a luxury, waiting on the adjustable bed, the gown tied at her neck just barely covering her. Soon she'll be subjected to interrogation about her medical history, her pain, her habits, all the questions she knows by heart, and all the sterile responses that won't move the investigation forward. 3 men in white coats surround the patient, the tableau vivant, movements frozen, mouths open and ready to speak, concerned looks. They're holding reassuring test results. No brain injury, 0 anomalies. And one of them, the one Ninon identifies as the chief, older, belly protruding, lifts the corner of her paper gown, palpates and probes for the umpteenth time in months. It's getting old. Applies pressure to her skin, to the organs beneath her skin, listens, taps, manipulates her joints, tests her reflexes. Impotent like all the others before Ninon's silent body. The invisible symptom resistant to the medical art of observation, seeing as there's nothing to observe, nothing from which to draw a conclusion, not a patch of red, not the shadow of a lump, not the hint of a deformation or deterioration that would guide a diagnosis, nothing to sink your teeth into, nothing observable, and therefore nothing logical. When confronted with Ninon's case, the doctors are always hopelessly deprived of their senses, their eyes, their eardrums. Their fingers can't find anything, normal cardiac rhythm, ideal pulse, no fever, no palpitations, no cramps, no yellowing of the whites of the eyes, no bleeding, no tumors, no swelling, no ganglions, no shortness of breath or congestion, no abnormal echoes in the thorax, no vibrations in the abdomen, no crackling in the bones, no rumblings in the stomach, an abyssal silence, nothing to bring back from the depths to the surface, an inscrutable surface, hopelessly opaque. It's always the same refrain. The youngest of the 3 doctors, who may or may not be joking in this moment, suggests opening Ninon up to finally see what's going on in this body's black box, to peacefully rummage around her insides, to penetrate the mystery of this magnificent and extensive allodynia that has never been categorized in medical literature, to finally be done with this thing that's resisting. Because joking or not, the young resident doesn't like being resisted. He sees himself as a soldier of health hurling himself onto the patient's body as if onto a battlefield, onto Ninon, the theater of operations, a complex landscape, surface worn by hollows and bumps, crevices and slopes, a terrain on which to deploy the forces, each doctor representing an infantry corps. The young resident is daydreaming, but it's what Ninon is imagining as well. A battlefield where they'll fight it out, and she feels like they're not fighting hard enough.
Thanks, Laura. I've like forgotten, or I guess I kind of forgot that scene in a certain way. It's one of the few times I feel like where you're getting a little bit of an interior of one of the like medical professionals that's trying to diagnose her, but they actually care, you know, like he's actually there. Like I feel like so often she's kind of going in and out of doctor's appointments and just being told like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, or it's nothing, or you're lying, or she's sort of feeling like sort of slowly gaslit by the medical industry. But that's one time where it feels like the doctor is trying to be on her side, whether or not they really know what they're doing yet. Yeah. So I sort of feel like anytime there's like a break in what is normal in a novel, it's like that part is supposed to have a spotlight on it in some way, you know. So it was a good section to read.
I mean, what I like about this book is that it's actually interesting to see how it's being publicized in the English version and the French version. It's very different, but that you know, this is a book about, I mean, I wrote this myself, about the female experience of illness and healing, but it's very much subdued. That's not what the plot is about. It's always underlying, but as a woman reader, as a female reader, I can't help but notice that most of the doctors are men, and their behavior, their speech patterns are very familiar. So, you know, this is kind of an interesting one to read, because most of the times it's you'll be fine, you know, get some sleep, get some rest, relax, which is a narrative that is so familiar, having sort of been in those medical offices myself, which I'm sure most people can empathize with.
I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the difference between the way that, I mean, it's just a little bit arbitrary, but like the way that the French edition was marketed different, that was different from the English. I have no framework. I mean, I have no frame of reference for that.
I mean, it's hard because she's brand new in America, you know, and it's hard to get readers interested. I guess depending where you are in translated literature, it's always an uphill battle. So you really have to like capitalize on these sort of topical elements or something that's interesting or bizarre. Whereas in France, you know, she's well, I should talk about her a little. She's well established. She's not a huge writer. She's kind of one of those. Well, she might be like Catherine Lacy. She's kind of one of those like cool writers that you know, they're not really doing what everyone else is doing, but she's carved out her audience and has just a very particular style to her. And I've been kind of writing these really intense, interesting, bizarre novels for over a decade now. So I think she is well respected. And so when she writes a novel, this one, it's about
this is like her third or fourth, I think.
Oh my gosh, it is her fourth novel, but she
Okay.
also sometimes writes sort of nonfiction works, and then they're debatably nonfiction or not. So I think this is technically her fourth novel. And so in France, it was more like Joy Sorman has a new book, and what she does is she delves into like a specific field for each book. It's very different. So this one was medical. The last one was butchery. The newest one is mental illness. And so it was like Joy Sorman is writing about illness and medicine, and there was you know, the feminine female part about it was part of it, but I feel like in the US it's just like this is so topical right now and people want to hear about it, they want to read about it, that's really been what's been pulled out. And I think in France maybe it was a little bit more, you know, Joy Sorman, she's at it again, let's see what she's doing, you know, which makes sense.
Right. Well, so her kind of the lineage of her books it becomes a part of it. So it's hard to it's hard to exactly separate it because we're basically treating it like it's a debut in a certain way.
Yeah.
Because it is from our perspective. I wonder, one thing we mentioned over email was that the idea of like claiming the word feminist in France means something different there than it does here. And I only know a little bit about it. My understanding is that it's kind of maybe by like certain kind of groups of intellectuals in France, it's sort of seen as like an unnecessary term, or like maybe even a little bit demeaning. But I don't feel like from an intellectual perspective, at least in the States, that's not generally the criticism of the term feminism. But I'm wondering if you know a little bit more about it and why she had to kind of, Joy Sorman is like proud to call herself a feminist in France, and that means something very different than it does here. You can be like, oh, I'm proud to call myself a feminist. It's like, okay, yes, get in line. Here, like it doesn't mean as like much.
Duh, right? Yeah. Now I mean, I feel like this could be like a whole different conversation, and I actually wish I was a little bit more well versed in like the evolution of feminism in France, but I mean, I can comment on it just sort of as a long-standing observer. And so the thing that sparked this conversation on email is that when I was first pitching my translation of Sorman, and just by the way, it's been 7 years, so it took me a while. But when I was first pitching it, I used a bio, I think came from her publisher's website. And it was something about like, Joy Sorman is a writer, former philosophy professor, and self-proclaimed feminist. And I'm sure for over like years, I probably just used that. And then at one point I said, why self-proclaimed? Because my assumption was obviously she's a feminist. I think that's sort of a very American, like, yeah, duh, like get on board, like let's, you know, especially
right
shit show over the past 2 years, right? But I think in France, you know, they are a little bit behind, and there's still this idea that, you know, angry feminist, and how old school is that? But I think that it is, yeah, you can spark some commentary tied to that, whereas maybe in the States, I mean, just in this one domain, maybe we're a little bit further ahead in that aspect. And I don't think I even mentioned this to the publisher, but her first novel was called Boys, Boys, Boys. It had an English title, and it was it was about gender roles and girls who want to be boys and boys who want to be girls, and then girls and boys who don't want to be either, and they don't really care, and they just want to do what they want to do. And this came out over 10 years ago. And I was thinking about it today when I was thinking about this conversation, and I think that, you know, nowadays that wouldn't be a radical novel. I mean, I guess it'd be radical to some people,
Right.
but not, you know, that it's very timely. And I think that was because that was her debut novel in France, that she sort of probably got a lot of heat, and maybe that's why the self-proclaimed. I mean, I should ask her. I really should just ask her, but.
Right. Wow. So I think it's also interesting. I mean, I know a few translators, and I know there's sort of different routes that books take between being published in one language and appearing in another one. But it seems to me like pretty unusual that a translator, or maybe you could tell me, that a translator would sort of like seek out and be the one to like pitch the book, because they kind of like, I really want to work on this. And that seems like the ideal marriage between translator and text, really. But it seems also a little bit uncommon. Is it unusual to take that route to?
It's actually, I would say the opposite. I think that there's like,
Ah.
I don't even know if there's thousands of translators, but most of us are out here like with the book that you think is like the best book in the world, and you just want to translate it. And I think most of us spend a long time just to break into the field. You kind of have to do that, because publishers aren't generally like, hey, you know, like, let me put a job ad for a translator. So really the only way that you can kind of start in this field is by saying, I have this book, and here's why it's so good, and here's why it's good for your publishing house, and here's why I should translate it, and here's a sample. So it actually is, I think, how most of us get started. And it's terrible, it's unpaid, and it takes years. And we were talking about Jennifer Croft earlier with Matt, who
Yeah.
they had an event with her, I think he was saying, and her, you know, her Booker Prize winning novel, she spent years pitching that. So I think all translators, if you ask them, and we're so excited to be asked, what's the novel like in your like Word document, Dropbox, whatever, and we're like, oh my God, let me tell you, and why it's never been published, and you know, yeah. So it's pretty common, sadly, or not.
Okay, so to get a little bit more into the book, I feel like there's like, my sort of initial feeling with reading it was that it functions almost like a fable in some ways. I mean, it's though you said, like, and we heard the prose, it has a contemporary feel. It's not like she's engaging in a completely fabulous language or abstract imagery or anything like that, but there is a kind of sort of every woman a little bit in Ninon. She doesn't, we do get like a little bit of characterization from her, more just from like the edges and sort of her attitude and sort of her spirit as she moves through this medical shit show. But anyway, there's like a little bit of a kind of like a kind of fairy tale aspect to this, with the story feels. But I was sort of thinking, like, when I think fairy tales, I think Grimm's, and when I think Grimm's, I think of like all like a kind of mono narrator where like all detail is really washed out, and you know, those fairy tales were constructed to warn people of very specific things, to warn children mostly of very specific dangers that they might confront in their lives or in their childhoods. And with this one, I sort of feel like if it's a fairy tale, I want it to what it's warning the reader of to change, like hopefully the system that Ninon is sort of confronting, like having to sort of anticipate this horror that's going to befall her, and then experience it, and then live through it. Like the way that functions as a metaphor of the history of patriarchy that girls and women have to anticipate and see coming to them, and then experience, like generally, like, you know, you'll have many experiences in your lifetime where you feel like you're coming up against this thing that you sort of saw coming over time. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense, but what I'm hoping is that like over time, that the meaning of this fairy tale or this fable will change. I guess in the same way that like Grimm's fairy tales maybe have sort of the kind of core of their meaning has sort of changed over time. Like I'm less, you know, the problems of like hundreds of years ago for a young girl are a little different than the problems of now are. One hopes that like there's a more rapid change, right? From now, if we can imagine somebody reading this in 100 years, which I think we can. I think it has that kind of like staying power to it. But I would hope that the meaning would change, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And oh my God, I hope so. Please. This sparked two thoughts in my head. First, I love that you compared to Grimm's Tales, because even though Ninon is sort of, she is this sort of like the little girl growing up hearing all these stories, so that like, trope of fairy tales. But Joy Sorman does have a sort of like detached way of writing. So when you said that Grimm's Tales are sort of these like everything's like blend amorphous character without much personalization, it sort of stuck with me, because one of the feedback I got when I was pitching this was that there was this detachment, like we weren't in her head. And I kind of was like, well, isn't that kind of cool? Isn't that kind of nice just to be sort of like looking out from a macro view for a while? I loved your interest. So I'm going to quote it back to you, because I think it kind of like summarizes what you're saying about these fairy tales. But so what did you write? Let me find it. Yeah, fairy tales tell this again and again. There is a place for you in this world, a beautiful and dangerous place, and it's better that you accept it now, as you really have no choice. Better to prepare girls for what's coming now. Better to tell them the bad news first and let them invent their own good news later. So, please, how about in 100 years, that would be great. If the story was so antiquated, like what women are treated differently in hospitals, and their symptoms are dismissed and their pain is viewed as imaginary. Yes, let's get rid of all that.
Yeah, and I think also like the way that I feel like I experienced the story functioning metaphorically was in a way that I hadn't really seen in other contemporary books, or even in any books that I have read, at least, where I felt like the villain was not men, and it was not the medical industry, and it was not any of the apparent sort of problems in her life, or even her own body. The villain was history. The villain was it's the lineage of this disease and this curse that's in her family. But you can read that in a bunch of different ways. It's not like, you don't have to just read it as like, oh, there's a curse in her family, like too bad for her. It's like, no, I sympathize. I feel like there's a curse in my family if I experience my family as like all people and all women. I feel like we're all sort of feeling this thing come towards us, and then having to grapple with it. I don't know. And I guess it functions on a bunch of different levels. It's funny what you say about the narrator too, because I experienced I think there's a lot of personality in this narrator. Maybe it says something about like me and how I experience the world, and what the kinds of books that I like to read, that there's like, I found there to be plenty of personality in like the kind of wry ways that narrator sort of looks at things. And I understood it to be pretty close to Ninon, but not in her, not trying to experience the pain that she's experiencing, but rather trying to see it the way that she might see it if she wasn't in so much pain. Like, I think when you write narrators that are completely overwhelmed, it's limiting, And so if this book had been told from Ninon's perspective, I'm sure Joy Sorman could write a wonderful book that was still from her perspective she had chosen to, but the trade-off is you would be kind of, especially when it comes to pain, you just be kind of headlocked in the way that you can narrate authentically from that perspective.
That's so smart. I feel like maybe you should have been pitching this on my behalf for all these years. And it's like so interesting. I was emailing this, but it's so interesting to hear this, because as a translator, we get so fixated on the details, the minutia, word choice and syntax and punctuation and everything. So, I read this book a million times, but just to like sort of like zoom out, and especially hear how other people are perceiving it, because everything you're saying makes sense. And I'm like, yes, exactly. That's exactly what I should have said. But it's just refreshing to hear another take on it.
Well, there's no talking sense into like the literary world exactly. And like, you can't, if somebody reads a text and they just don't feel it, you can't make them feel it no matter how much you argue that they should feel it, which is really the frustrating thing with like criticism or having to advocate for your own books or anything like that, where it's like, if you don't see it in the text, I can't make you see it. I can describe the ways in which you are maybe like sufficient or insufficient as a reader, but that's not very nice.
And I mean, that kind of makes, I mean, that's kind of what I like about Joy Sorman, is that I know that not everyone likes her. I mean, if you're looking for a standard plot with demarcated dialogue and, you know, just sort of like a coming of age story, this isn't it. She's sort of interested in just playing with language and playing with style. And I think she does it very well. So
yeah, I wonder too if like all books that are about teenagers or young adults like have to be described as coming of age. You know, like what does coming of age really mean? Like now that I think about it, because I do think that it's the kind of immediate way that I describe any book that's about like a younger person. But like I don't know if this character is even given like the luxury to really come of age. She really is like up against so much immediate sort of present danger that it's not really, I'm not quite sure if for me it doesn't quite function on that level, even though I'm pretty sure I have described it as a coming of age book. But I'm kind of calling my own bullshit.
I want to add, so because I don't think I said in the intro, but she lives with this chronic pain, this excruciating pain for over a year. She ends up holed up in her room, and she really goes on this quest by herself. She doesn't want she lives with her mom, a single mom, and she doesn't want anyone involved. So it really is about, I mean, it's a good point. It's not a coming of age story, really.
It does feel like more like a quest novel, you know.
Exactly.
It's like a, you know, and actually like a few days ago I was having this conversation with a friend about like the hero's journey, that Joseph Campbell book that's about kind of, you know, heroes through all of literature and how there's these kind of archetypal stories that we tell over and over again in myth and story and novel and film and whatever. And it was called The Hero's Journey. And we were like, or my friend, I can't take credit. I mean, my friend was like, you know, interested in like, well, what would a heroine's journey look like? And then I saw that like a book just came out that has something to do with heroine's journey. So maybe there's like something like in this moment right now that's answering questions that people are having immediately about this specific thing. But it does seem to me that it's more of a hero's journey or heroine's journey kind of book. And I'm not, I mean, maybe one could, I'm no expert in like exactly why we use these specific terms and what coming of age really means, but in my understanding, it does seem like it's more like she's already come of age. I feel like you get a lot of her childhood also in the book, and kind of in flashbacks in these stories that that she was told, or not, it's not quite flashbacks, but the mother is telling Ninon as bedtime stories, the stories of all of her ancestors. And is there a feminine of ancestor?
I think I did use it once. I think I used it once, and I don't know if it stayed in there, but I slipped in there, so technically it exists. Yeah.
Okay.
Says, yeah.
And it's in there.
I think so.
Yeah, but she wants to hear about what's happened to all the other women that have had this curse, and I think that you're sort of understanding her by knowing the stories that she's told as a child, and you sort of know about like the kind of the building blocks that make up her personality and sort of what she's anticipating happening to her and what she finds interesting. Yeah, so I don't know. I experienced the character as already of age, but maybe that's also a French thing too.
Well, the French are like, they come out of the womb just like, I don't know,
smoking cigarettes.
They're just a different, yeah. This just remind me though, there are all these like vignettes of like these stories about how the women in her family have like had these bizarre illnesses and stuff. And then there's one little chapter about the men, and basically, I'm just, because I think it's hilarious, it's just all these men were criminals. They just were idiots, and they like threw stones at animals, and they like ran a brothel, and just like the idiots, and they went to jail. And that's like the only commentary about the men in the family. So I think that's just, I think she's just having fun actually in that part. But
yeah, I see, this is yet another point that like there's an enormous amount of personality in the narrator. I got like I thought it was very funny, and I thought there was like a lot of kind of asides and sort of jokes, and like there was real personality in it, you know, to my reading. Let's see. Oh, I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit about as I understand it, autofiction is something that like the French have really nailed, and sort of there's like it's it has a very chiseled sort of solid place in French literature, you know, both historically and in the contemporary sense. And I feel like it's something that is like a kind of caustically debated topic in American literary circles of like autofiction. Is it cool? Is it not cool? Is it trendy? Is it not trendy? Is it over? Is it now? And like, we're just like so irritable about like the idea of autofiction even having a regular place in American letters, but then also what it is and whether you can call something autofiction or not. And it seems to me that and just correct whatever misunderstandings I have, but in France, it's just like it's a mode. It doesn't, you can do it or not do it. It doesn't matter exactly. It seems like has more space and it's less critiqued as a genre or as like a type of writing, but that there's a strain, and this is my first I heard about it was today in an email from you, that there's this strain of docu-fiction that's almost like a reaction to autofiction. I was wondering if you could explain to me, because I truly don't know what that is.
Yeah. No, everything you said about autofiction in France, I think sounds spot on. I mean, it's like, it's established, it's there, it's been there for a while. I don't think people, I mean, I'm sure that when it first started, people were, you know, up in arms about it. But yeah, I think it's been like a good, I don't know, I'm terrible with dates, 20 years. I don't know. So I don't think people really are shocked by it or irritated by it. Though Americans certainly are irritated by it. I agree with that. But yeah, docu-fiction. I'm so like obsessed with this group in France, and they're so hard to find info about. So that makes them even like more mysterious to me. But there's this sort of wave of writers, and they call it docu-fiction, which, as I wrote, it sounds so obvious. Once you read it, you're like, oh, duh. So it's like documentary writing plus fiction. So they draw from social sciences, anthropology, journalism, sociology, all that stuff. And they take a really like documentarian approach to certain things, and usually entails extensive research, and then squeeze it into a novel and mix it all up. And it sparks these very bizarre, interesting texts. And so they're actually kind of mainstream now, but when they were beginning, it was sort of regarded as this like very cool experimental pushback, you know, going away from this focus on interiority and the me, and like, I mean, like that's the whole French obsession with like Vergnaud and like, you know, let's navel gaze, but like to its absurd extreme. So this is sort of the opposite. Like I'm not looking at myself at all. I don't like Joy Sorman. I can't find her in these books. Like I'm also kind of obsessed with Joy Sorman, who I've never met. But she, like, I can't find her in these books. These books are not about her. This is all like stuff that's like sparks some interest in her brain, and then she will go and spend a year just researching these domains. So there have been some of the writers in her cohort who have been published in the U.S., namely Mathias Senard and Maladies de Galangad. So, you know, those books are out there, but I think Joy Sorman is a little bit weirder than her peers. So Maladies de Galangad, you know, does the same thing. She picks a domain, like I just saw she wrote a book about painting, and she immerses herself in it, and it has this terminology, like the technical terminology, and that's very much part of it. But Joy Sorman sort of takes that, and then she like adds just weird stuff happening, and not so much in this book, but there'll be these sort of like fantastical surrealist elements, and she's just having fun. I mean, that's the sense I get. She's just saying, how far can I push the idea of what a novel is, and how far can I push style and what's expected. So I hope that kind of.
Yeah, it does. It seems like the kind of trend that would take off in the States, especially when like just considering that like nonfiction books tend to sell a lot more copies than fiction books. And I feel like one of the main complaints, unfortunately, that I've heard in the last like decade plus from people that don't read that many novels or any novels at all is that they want to like learn something while they're reading. And so they like only read nonfiction because I think that's where they're going to learn things. Which may kind of be true if it just sort of depends on what sort of things you want to learn, I guess. But I find it very irritating. Yeah, maybe we should blend the two together, and then everybody can learn something while reading a novel.
I mean, Joy Sorman's, the novel before this, the one we were talking about, is so the domain is zoology and animal captivity and animal behavior, but the novel framing is a bear that rapes a woman that then has a half bear, half Maine baby. So if people want to learn about, like, I feel like that might not be the same crowd that you're talking about, but
maybe not. Yeah, what kind of research did she? How many like half bear, half humans did she have to
I mean,
interview
but that's
to-
just like she just takes these things and then she comes up with these just like unexpected stories and runs with it. But I mean, you will learn things, I'm sure.
Yeah, it sounds great. I so when you were describing that one, I really want to read that. Are you in the process of translating it?
Oh,
Or
I think it's like right next to me. Actually, I was just reading it the other day. Yeah, I
you have like a chunk of it.
No. I'm translating the one about. She wrote another one about pigs and cows going mad and flying and things like that. So I'm translating that one, and we're gonna see if that gets published. But I'm hopeful that the bear one will be next. I'm really fond of the bear one, so we'll see.
It reminds me of this. There's this film that's just out that I think won a bunch of awards at the Cannes Film Festival called it's French and it's called, I think, Titane. Would that be the right word for titanium in French?
Translators should know this. I don't know.
I mean, I don't know if titanium is exactly like you're going to be finding that in every novel, but there is a woman who becomes pregnant by way of a car and gives, well, I don't want to give away the ending, but she is certainly pregnant by way of a car, and so she has this kind of half car, half human that she's carrying. And then there's a film, and I haven't seen this one. There's a film that's coming out that's about like a lamb that gives birth to like a half human, half lamb. I don't know what happened to that lamb. I haven't seen the film, but it just seems sort of unusual to like this many, like, you know, half beast, half human things. Of course, that as like a trope and as like a piece of mythology is something that's, you know, very well trod over in the like historic context of storytelling, but just seems unusual that it's like cropping up so quickly and in this era, and it's sort of in similar ways. I don't know.
They're all written or produced by women, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think all of the above.
Motherhood transforming us into half beast, half, I don't know. I'm sure you could do something there.
Somebody's writing a thesis on it like right now. There's
exactly.
Absolutely a PhD in this subject already. I wonder though, on like a kind of language level, how Life Sciences compares to her other novels. Did you see it as a departure or in a lineage, or?
For whatever reason, Joy Sorman's like writing is the one that resonates the easiest with me. And so since she's also one of the French authors whose career I've followed the most closely. Like every time she puts out a book, like I'm on it, I'm reading it, I'm researching it. So she has a very distinctive style. And I would say that actually her first book, which is sort of about gender roles, is kind of a standout. It's a little bit different. And I feel like she was just kind of figuring out her own style. But then after that, they've all kind of been written similarly. So, like the part I read in the beginning of this talk, she loves long sentences. She loves just comma, comma, comma. I kind of tend to think about it as just these like long breaths, and you just got to kind of like, it's like a deep dive and just going with it. And then she'll slow down and give you like a chance to breathe, and then she'll start going again. So as a translator, it's actually very, oh my God, I'm gonna be so corny. I was gonna say it's a joy to translate. Okay, yeah. Anyway, it's a delight to translate because French can be, very smooth and lyrical and eloquent, but it can also be very stodgy and very like self-aware, if that makes sense. So some books are just such not a pain, but like you got to really like, okay, I need to like focus. I need to really crack this language open and like dissect, because English is such not a simpler language, but more succinct, more concise. So Joy Sorman, luckily, just has a way of writing that is I don't want to say easy to translate, because that would make it sound like my job is easy, which I don't want to admit to. But yeah, she has a very
you feel in sync. It's almost like you feel in sync with her thought patterns or something.
Yeah. Not too creepy, but yeah.
I mean, there's really only so many, I don't know. It also reminded me of this book I guess the only other book that I could think of that was like slightly similar to it in the stance that the heroine of the book has is, well, it's actually very different. Like the more I think about it, the more it seems different. But I just jotted it down earlier. It was this book called Dora, a Head Case by Lydia Yuknovich, and it's about it is actually, maybe it might fall into like the American version of docu-fiction now that I'm thinking about it, now that I know what docu-fiction is. But it's about Dora was like I think the fake name given to one of Freud's patients that he wrote like a whole book about. And, Freud being the complicated fellow that he was, Lydia Yuknovich imagined that perhaps Dora would have some objections to the fact that he, published, his case study of her as like a work of his. And so she kind of recast it as like Dora is, a contemporary girl who's going to take revenge on her psychoanalyst whose name is Freud. And you just sort of understand them as like, they're kind of standing in for these characters, but it's all happening in like today rather than 100 years ago. And anyway, there's some kind of similar spunk of like, I feel like the kind of animating principle of that book was that like Lydia Yuknovich, or her kind of narrative stance, like had a little bit of a bone to pick with history in the same way that I feel like this book is sort of pressing against what we inherit and rejecting it, but also grappling like head on with it. And this one more kind of, as we said, like metaphorically and fabulistically, and that one a little bit more like almost like an action movie about like queer teenagers getting revenge on Freud. Which anyway, I recommend them both. They're very similar. If you like this one, you like that one.
I was gonna say she's an author who more than one person has recommended her to me. So now hearing that, I'm curious to read it.
She's very like I wonder. I feel like she might be maybe like a Joy Sorman equivalent, also maybe in English, just because Yuknovich is just so like, she's so raw and present in all of her writing. I haven't read everything, and she's written a good deal at this point, but she's just she definitely would self-identify as feminist, if she was a French woman and had to choose or something.
It also like makes me think that I would be so curious to see how like American authors or Anglophone authors would like reading Sorman, and then sort of like if that would influence their writer, how they would take it. I think that would be so interesting to see. Like imagine all these people read this book, and then it's sort of like, because docu-fiction and because this is very French and this is a very new style, that I would just be so curious to see in a few years from now, what if there was an author who was saying, actually I was inspired by Joy Sorman, who's a French writer, that just to like see that sort of travel across the ocean.
Well, that's like, this is what I love about translated fiction, is that you're really getting two writers. I mean, you're getting the original text, but then you're getting it in a kind of slanted way. You're getting the reading experience in some ways more than you will when you're just reading work that hasn't been translated. Or that's what I feel like as like a writer reading a text that's been translated. I mean, most of the time I'm reading it and I'm just accepting it as if it had been written that way the first time. I mean, at least with a good translation, you wouldn't. I don't think I read that many bad translations. I don't think I can think of any offhand right now. You would know, I guess. But I guess that's what I like about it. And it does seem kind of like, I don't understand why, if you really want to know what's happening with writing, why you would limit yourself to the country that you've been born in. If you're really interested in contemporary writing, which I am, but then if you're also interested in like what's possible with language, I certainly wouldn't want to limit myself to the only language that I can read with any depth. And so it just seems crazy to me that like, at the end of the year or something, when these people publish their like favorite books of the year, contemporary books that were published that year that they read or something, it's like not a single one is translated. Are you on drugs? Yeah. Like what happened? There's so much interesting stuff coming out of other places. Anyway, it's always been a puzzle to me. I just feel like, and also it's sort of annoying how much, like so much American literature is translated into other languages. that it just seems like the least we could do is like meet that in some way, like as readers, for it to be a reciprocal relationship. And I think like most Americans find it really frustrating that like, or I shouldn't say most Americans anything. I don't know anything about most Americans, but like, I think a natural complaint would be that we take up too much space culturally in the world, or maybe less and less lately. Maybe this is, this is a problem.
And also I should add is that, I mean, this is a book from France. So, there's like one of the top, I don't know, 3-4 countries being translated from, and it's still a minute quality.
Yeah.
I mean, quantity. So, there's so much out there. It's actually overwhelming. Like, but yeah, there should be.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I'm an advocate for translation, but yeah.
As am I. Well, I wonder if it looks like we do have a Q&A or a Q. Maybe we have an A. Somebody says, an anonymous attendee says, I'm very excited to read the book and especially drawn to the description of the book as a critique of the medical establishment. What does the author have to say about alternative medicine? Do you know if Joy has anything to say about alternative medicine?
I'm going to guess what she has to say about it, which is nothing, because I mean, she doesn't really like, it's like one of the things I like about her. She's just sort of like, I'm interested in this like specific domain. I'm going to research it and then write a book about it. And then I'm just going to walk away from it. It's kind of her attitude. So I don't think I mean, maybe she does, but I'm guessing that she was very interested in this, in the idea of medicine. And there's a whole, several chapters about Ninon Moise, a shaman. She goes on this like oxygen cure. I can't remember, she takes, what's that Brazilian drug? She takes some drug.
Ayahuasca.
Yeah. So there are, that is part of it, but I'm guessing Joy Sorman is curious about it from an intellectual standpoint. Again, how would I know? But what I liked is one of her other books is about butchery. It's about a butcher, and it's very fascinating and weird. And that's where all the when I said flying anthropomorphized cows and pigs. But people got really riled up about it because in France, I mean, vegetarianism and that's, I mean, it's elsewhere, but people got really riled up about it, and they were like, this is an indictment of eating meat, and this is a call for vegetarianism. And then other people said the complete opposite. And I saw an interview, and she was like, I mean, I still eat steak, but whatever, was kind of her response, like just whatever, which I love, because it's just like, I'm not going to explain my books to you. I mean, she's very much an academic at heart. She's like, so on her behalf, that's what I'm going to say. Just, yeah. No comment.
Yeah, I could imagine her sort of rolling her eyes at this a little bit if she could see it. But I would say that the book, I can't speak for Joy Sorman, the author, but as a close reader of life sciences, it seems to me that the book is sort of like when once Ninon sort of runs through all the medical professionals, Western medical professionals that she can get to, she just goes to the other ones, and they also cannot provide the answer to her problem. And so I think there is something about, if you just imagine you have a character that has a problem that is going through these different attempts to answer it in the traditional and then alternative, settings. Like maybe they're not necessarily different. Maybe one's not necessarily better than the other, or skilled at answering questions. I do feel like the book sort of takes a stance that they're just different ways of looking at problems, and there's no hierarchy necessarily between them.
Yeah.
Another person says, now that life science isn't available in the US, do you think Sorman's other novels will follow? If you could choose another to translate, which would you bring here? You kind of already answered that, but maybe you could reiterate.
Yeah. I know my editor is like out there. So, and actually, I think that I know she's a huge fan of Joy Sorman too. So, I don't know. The thing about Joy is that she just has such cool books. Like they're so different. Like the style is the same, but I really love I should use our titles, but for simplicity, I like the Butcher book. That's probably one of my favorites. And then I'm dying just as a translation challenge to do the Bear book, because it's just like so weird, and also they're hard. I mean, there's like all this terminology from these different fields. So it's not just, I mean, I said I love to get absorbed by the language, but I do have to put in the time to find out, how you say XYZ in French, and then what term is used in the English equivalent. So I'm gonna vote for Butcher book and Bear book. Yeah, we'll see.
All right, I will second both of those. I'd like to get a lot more of Joy Sorman's books into English ASAP. That's my simple request. But maybe that's a good place to end on. Yeah. Thanks, you people, for coming out here into your computers on such a night and hearing us talk about a book that maybe you haven't read yet, but you should. And please get it from Unabridged or your nearest local bookseller.
Yes, I second that.
I'm gonna pop in, also clearly biased, but gonna second that recommendation as well. We do have copies available here in the store. So if you're interested and don't already have one, please order the book. Just want to also say a thank you to Lara and Catherine for joining us tonight. This has been an awesome conversation, so thank you both for being here. And
thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone.
And thanks to everybody else for joining us. Everybody have a good night.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.